Right then guys, and this is the future of Formula 1 according to F1 Manager 2023. The difference between the cars becomes so small that this is a sort of close quarters, highly competitive on-track action you end up with in the middle of a Grand Prix involving almost the entire grid. I'm starting the video off with this because the rest of the game, for better or worse, is very similar to F1 Manager 2022. And I went all the way through to 2031 in that game as well. It's just as easy, if not even easier, to create a title-winning team. Just plow everything into a search as soon as you can, and new for this game, make the existing parts on your car as light as possible by reducing their lifespan. Since AlphaTauri were in dire straits in real life, lost in the Constructors' Championship for a lot of the season, constantly changing drivers and with a team boss that didn't even trust his own engineers, that's the team I took over. Max Verstappen unsurprisingly won the 2023 Drivers' Championship with a total of 557 points, 141 ahead of Leclerc in second, and 177 ahead of his teammate Perez. Then you have both Aston Martins led by Stroll, both Mercedes with Russell ahead of Hamilton by just 1 point, Tsunoda and Magnussen both ended on 16 points, and both Alfa Romeos and Oscar Piastri were the only drivers not to score a point. Of course, Red Bull won the Constructors' Championship and with nearly 1,000 points total, and Ferrari were the clear second best, nearly 200 shy of Red Bull but over double that of Aston Martin in third. My AlphaTauri team took 8th in the table ahead of McLaren, who only have 5 points, and Alfa Romeo with none at all. New for F1 Manager 2023 are the feeder series, but I won't be talking about them in depth, otherwise this video will go on forever. But it was Teo Pourchaire and MP Motorsport who were the Formula 2 champions, whilst Paul Aron won the Drivers' Championship in Formula 3 and Prema the team's title. For similar reasons, I won't be talking through all of the personnel and engine supply changes for each team. But in the description there's a Google sheet with the full lineups and overall ratings of everyone in all the F1 teams, so if you want the full detail, it's there for you. All I will say for this season is that Bottas was the highest rated driver interested in joining AlphaTauri, but rejected an $18 million salary offer, and even that was way more than I wanted to pay him, so instead I signed Mick Schumacher for the relative bargain of $4 million to replace Nick de Vries. Just over a year after I took charge of AlphaTauri, I got my first race win, as Tsunoda beat Verstappen on raw pace in the Azerbaijan sprint race. Contrast that with Mick Schumacher, who locked up and crashed head-on into the wall from 7th place. That wasn't the only time Mick Schumacher crashed, and sometimes he didn't crash but locked up and dropped way down the order to such an extent that I voluntarily retired him. And then there's times when he was crashed into through no fault of his own. But there were some highs as he led the team's first 1-2 finish in Italy, despite the fact that both Red Bulls crashed into each other 4 times in 2024 alone. They still comfortably won both championships and did so in Mexico with 3 rounds to spare. Max Verstappen won his second World Drivers' title on the bounce with Perez's nearest rival, but still 110 points down, and Perez only moved ahead of Tsunoda in the standings after the final round. Both Ferrari drivers and a nearly 200 point margin separate both AlphaTauri drivers, and by now it should be apparent how important driver skill is in this game, apart from in Aston Martin's case, as Stroll beat Alonso again. This time 4 drivers failed to score points, with Hulkenberg also ending the year on 0. Red Bull won the Constructors' Championship again, but with a smaller margin over Ferrari, who were the runners-up again. I elevated AlphaTauri from 8th to 3rd, with Alpine now the 4th best team, as Mercedes dropped behind them and Aston Martin to 6th. McLaren beat Haas, and Alfa Romeo still haven't been able to score a point. In Formula 2, Frederic Vesti and his team Virtuosi won, whilst Formula 3 saw real-life F2 driver Juan Manuel Correa win the drivers and Trident the team's title. At the start of 2025, Hamilton and Alonso were without a driver and available as free agents, which, given their age and rating decline, sort of makes sense. But Piastri was also booted out of F1, which is absolutely bizarre, even if you factor in that he's yet to score a point. In last year's game I signed Alonso after he was dropped, so this time I brought in Hamilton since I really needed someone decent in the second seat. That wasn't the only big change, as Leclerc joined Red Bull, Russell moved to Ferrari, and presumably Hülkenberg retired since he disappeared without a trace. But weirdly, it's the same story for F3 champion Correa, who had also vanished from the roster. What I unintentionally did was reignite the Hamilton-Verstappen rivalry, as the battle for the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix victory was between the two of them, with Hamilton coming out on top and winning on his AlphaTauri debut. Even despite Hamilton being clattered into by Bottas in the Brazil sprint race, which meant he scored no points there and then had to do a recovery drive in the Grand Prix to take 5th, and then a red flag coming out just after Hamilton pitted in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which meant he was all the way down in 15th for the restart. He was still able to win the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and the 2025 Drivers' title. Tsunoda even outscored Leclerc in the second Red Bull, but lower down it was still roughly the same as before. That said, McLaren finally found some decent pace, with Norris and Albon comfortably making double figures, and even both Alfa Romeo drivers were able to score points. The only driver which never got into the top 10 was Isaac Hadjar for Haas. AlphaTauri's Constructors' Championship win, McLaren outscoring Williams and Mercedes, and finally Alfa Romeo scoring points and not finishing last were the only changes from 2024. In the feeder series, it was Enzo Fittipaldi for Trident who emerged as the F2 champion and helped take them to the team's championship win. Caio Collet along with MP Motorsport won both titles in F3. 2026, just as will be the case in real life, saw a major technical rule change, and my research-focused approach meant AlphaTauri were miles ahead of everyone else. In Bahrain, we took an easy 1-2 with both Red Bulls over 30 seconds away from winning, Russell and the Ferrari in 5th a minute and a half off, and everyone else was lapped. It's almost like the game knew I was having things too easy, as both Hamilton and Tsunoda crashed so uncharacteristically often that it eventually became pretty infuriating, and combined with the other two rule changes for this year, ended up putting my team into a bit of a hole in terms of powertrain component wear. So we ended the year with a fire at the factory and our competitive advantage shot to pieces. Tsunoda's car inevitably and spectacularly let go on him in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and Hamilton dragged his down on power car to 8th. But it didn't matter. That's how big our pace advantage was and how dominant we were at the start of the year. Yuki Tsunoda was crowned a Drivers' Champion in 2026, but both Hamilton and Verstappen were within 10 points of him come the end. Russell narrowly beat his new teammate Norris in the Ferrari intra-team battle, and everybody scored points including Hadjar for Haas. AlphaTauri won a Constructors' Championship again, with Mercedes bettering their result last year by finishing 5th, and Alfa Romeo continued their climb up the order to take 8th place, with Williams now the team in last. Ollie Behrman racing for Trident was the F2 champion, with Trident the team's champion, and in F3 we had our first fictional driver as a champion, as Renato Caruso in a Trident was the overall victor, with MP Motorsport the team's champion. By this point, team switching had been added to the game, so I moved over to Haas, who finished 9th in 2026, and have the second lowest rated driver pairing. And on that topic, Théo Pourchaire joined Alfa Romeo to be the first F2 champion crowned in this game save to race in F1. My move away from AlphaTauri was justified immediately when Tsunoda and Hamilton crashed into each other on the opening lap in Bahrain. And then Hamilton followed that up with a spin in Saudi Arabia and contact with Norris in Australia. Nice to know it wasn't my fault for all those crashes last year. But they weren't totally lost without me and still had decent pace. But it was hardly a whitewash, and I was still able to make a noticeable impact on Haas, as Doohan genuinely led the Dutch Grand Prix. That wasn't going to last, as I was down to different timings for everyone's one and only stop. But even still, he crossed the line for a deeply impressive 5th place finish. Yuki Tsunoda won his second Drivers' Championship much more comfortably than his first, partly because his teammate was all the way down in 5th, behind both Red Bulls and Russell in a Ferrari with nearly 200 points less than the season's champion. Albon confidently outscored his new McLaren teammate of Perez, whilst the former Alpine and current Mercedes pairing didn't fare well in what is clearly an underwhelming Silver Arrows car, with Sargent in a Williams even outscoring Gasly. Everyone got into double figures except both Alfa Romeo drivers, who scored a total of 0. AlphaTauri won the Constructors' Championship with less than a 100-point buffer over Red Bull. Alpine beat Ferrari to 3rd, which is a real turn-up, although arguably not as much as Mercedes being the second lowest scoring, originally Mercedes powered team. And in fact, the only other teams that used Mercedes engines this season were Aston Martin in an anonymous 6th, and Alfa Romeo, who were the only team unable to score any points. Jack Crawford's the latest Trident driver to win in F2, as the team has won both championships 3 seasons in a row. Whilst Rassela Kondakar, I hope I've pronounced the name correctly, is the second fictional driver to win in F3, whilst MP won the team's title for the 3rd year in succession. It's worth quickly delving into the driver market now we're 5 years on and in 2028. Hamilton is still going because I signed him up to a multi-year contract when I was still at AlphaTauri, but his overall rating has dropped by 5 since the career started, whilst his new teammate of Verstappen has had an overall increase of 5 in the same time. Meanwhile, Red Bull are now fielding the driver pairing of Norris and Leclerc. Also, 90 overall Bottas, 88 overall Perez, and reigning champion 90 overall Tsunoda were all made free agents this year, despite having the skill on paper at least, and in at least Tsunoda's case, definitely in reality, to still be in F1. More so than Hamilton, and you could argue how realistic that will prove to be in real life in 2028. But what's most improbable is Oscar Piastri, who's returned to F1 after a 3-year break. His attributes are unchanged from when he left. The problem is he was just a free agent, whereas all the other youngsters like his Alpha teammate Teo Pourchaire or new McLaren signing Zane Maloney have either been a reserve in F1 or competed in the junior category, so have had their ratings increase in that time, unlike Piastri. Even De Vries, who is older but only had a 1-year spell away from F1, is now a better driver than Piastri. It took me 3 seasons to win a title with AlphaTauri, but just 2 to get there with Haas. 11 Grand Prix wins, 4 sprint wins and 21 podiums mean Liam Lawson comfortably became the 2028 Formula 1 Drivers' Champion, beating Verstappen in a once dominant AlphaTauri by 109 points. Jack Doohan was over 200 points down on his Haas teammate, but beat both Red Bulls led by Leclerc, as well as a now well past it Lewis Hamilton, who, given how close in performance most of the teams are and therefore how critical driver ratings are, can't really cut it anymore at 43 years old, the same age Michael Schumacher was when he retired from F1 for good. Every driver scored at least 10 points, and both Alfa Romeos, and what an exciting pairing that is, beat both Williams. Haas bested runners-up AlphaTauri by nearly 300 points, whilst less than 250 points separated 3rd down to 8th. But it was Ferrari who had a shocking season as they came last in that group and only outscored Alfa Romeo and Williams. Guess what? Trident won both championships in F2 again, and it was real-life F3 driver Dino Beganovic who won the driver's title, whilst another fictional driver, Waysham Watson, won the individual honours in F3 but in an ART, which makes a change, and MP Motorsport won their 4th consecutive team's championship. With my work at Haas done, I switched to another team that has struggled throughout this career, and that is Alfa Romeo. I accidentally inherited a decent team, and I knew the driver lineup was good, but their car was solid, and most of the cars are so similarly matched that all I needed to do was plough as much money and resources as possible into designing upgrades pre-season, and that was genuinely enough for Pourchaire to take pole, and even despite a pit stop issue, win the Bahrain Grand Prix with a 10-second margin. And Piastri overtook the new AlphaTauri driver of Leclerc on the penultimate lap to secure a 1-2 on my debut for Alfa Romeo. Genuinely, it was those upgrades at the start of the year that did it, as I redid the race sticking with Haas, and I was able to take them to a comfortable 1-2 with Alfa Romeo down in 7th and 8th. But in the Canon Grand Prix with me at Alfa Romeo, Haas threw away the brilliant position I put them in as Lawson finished in 8th, and Doohan spun out from 11th place on the final lap to finish in 16th instead. Piastri's time away from F1 meant he was out of his depth compared to everyone else and, with rare exception, struggled to deliver the same podium and race-winning performances that his teammate was able to. That, along with the team's competitiveness fading as the season went on, cost us the Constructors' Championship. That makes 2029 the first year in this career mode where different teams won the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. Théo Pourchaire is the 2029 Formula 1 World Champion, beating Norris in the Red Bull, who was the runner-up. All 4 Red Bull employed drivers outscored Piastri, but he did edge out both Haas, showing just how big of an advantage the team threw away once Günther Steiner took over again. Russell for Ferrari was the best of the rest and everybody scored points, but it was the Aston Martin pairing in last with Magnussen at the bottom on just 5 points. Red Bull outscored Alfa Romeo in the closest constructors battle we've seen so far, with my 2 former teams in 3rd and 4th, and Ferrari passed McLaren for 5th in the final round. Alpine and Aston both dropped 3 places from 2028 and sandwiched Williams. Oliver Goethe, who drove in F3 in 2023, won the 2029 Formula 2 Drivers' title whilst trying to maintain their team's winning streak. Tristan Rocha, with just a 59 overall rating, is the latest fictional Formula 3 champion and tried and topped the team's table in both junior categories. Given that driver ratings proved to be our big weakness at Alfa Romeo, I moved to a team which has 2 solid drivers. Specifically Mercedes, who have Pierre Gasly, and they swapped out Esteban Ocon for a talented youngster who had some decent results in 2029, Zane Maloney. They also have the lowest rated driver still in F1, which is Pietro Fittipaldi at 33 years old and just 69 overall. Lower than 2 fictional drivers which have found their way into reserve roles at Williams and Aston Martin. Meanwhile, Formula 1 champion Liam Lawson, as well as Kevin Magnussen, don't have a seat in F1 at all, which makes no sense. Unfortunately though, whilst I might have inherited a solid driver pairing, the car was dreadful, as we couldn't make it out of Q1 or score points in Bahrain. From there it got better as I was able to transform the Silver Arrows into a race-winning team in just the 4th round, as Gasly bested both Leclerc and Verstappen in AlphaTauris to win and take the fastest lap. There's lots I could say, but ultimately we were held by it being an incredibly closely fought title race, as after the Canadian Grand Prix, Leclerc led the Drivers' Championship despite not even winning a Grand Prix. Long the short of it though, consistency meant I took Mercedes from a Q1 elimination team to championship winners within a year. Pierre Gasly won the Drivers' Championship with Tsunoda for Red Bull the runner-up and only 9 points away from winning outright. Zane Maloney in the second Mercedes was 3rd, ahead of the likes of Ocon, Leclerc, basically pretty much everyone who races for either a team I managed or Red Bull. Albon in 10th for Alpine was the highest placed driver to have nothing to do with me or Christian Horner in this game save at least, and then both Ferraris and Joe from McLaren outscored Piastri in the second Alfa Romeo, who has just 32 points. No one ended the year on 0, but Richard Verschoor for Williams was the lowest placed driver and the only one not to make it into double figures on just 2. I returned Mercedes to Constructors' Championship glory on the first time of asking, and it's the first time I've won a Constructors' Championship without using Red Bull engines. Red Bull, Haas and AlphaTauri complete a fairly tight-knit top 4, but Alpine were able to beat my former team of Alfa Romeo, despite me leaving them in a golden position just last season. Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin and Williams round out the standings here in 2030. Real-life F3 driver Hugh Barter is the 2030 F2 champion, with Trident still the top dogs in that series, whilst Jonathan Bernard is the latest F3 champion and MP Motorsport returned to winning ways in the team's championship. And that's pretty much everything. Of course, I could talk about 2031, but we know what the end result will be, and anyway, we're in a situation where Charles Leclerc is the joint best driver but doesn't have a seat in F1. And Lance Stroll is somehow the third best available driver, but he doesn't have a seat either. It's not just Stroll though who's now incredible. Tsunoda's as good as Russell now thanks to the age gap, and Joe's one of the best drivers around. Say what you like about F1 23 by EA and Codemasters. Far from a perfect game, but the driver rating progression at the same point in that career mode was much more realistic, as it wasn't just about each driver's age, experience, and starting overall rating. It's much more tailored and specific to each driver's real life potential. This, what we see in F1 Manager 2023, very entertaining but not really believable and still overly simplistic. I stuck with Mercedes and my research-focused development strategy, particularly ahead of a major rule change which this season saw. And some pre-season upgrades meant that we were untouchable in Bahrain. So before this video gets too repetitive, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to leave a like, comment down below, and I'll see you guys in my next video.